Everybody, in anticipation of Chanukah, prayer for Chanukah, coming up. I know Obama already made the Chanukah party, so it could be a little early.
It lasted 8 years.
8 years, right? Actually, he gave a very nice Chanukah address. Some of what I wanted to say tonight, I see that we must have the same. We must have the same writers. But they did say there's kind of a very stupid. I mean, people were circulating a photo of Chabad, koshering the kitchen. And the White House kitchen, and they said, this is for Ivanka and Jared so they can eat in the White House. Obviously, it was for the Chanukah. I mean, the kitchen was not going to be kosher until January 20th. But okay. Anyway, Yeah. No, well, I mean, they do it every year. It's not the first time. They say it's the first time the White House kitchen has ever. I mean, every year it's kosher. Probably more than once for Israeli stuff. Yeah.
He also wishes Happy New Year or Rosh Hashanah.
Very good.
Shana Tikativu.
Nes Gadol Hayapo, he said. The 8 years. Yeah. Anyway, so I want to talk a little bit about Chanukah. I hopefully it won't be too overlapping with Rabbi Goldscheider. The Chanukah is a very, very fascinating holiday historically because it seems to be that there's Chanukah version 1 and Chanukah version 2. The oldest the story of Chanukah happens around 180, 185 BCE, before the Common Era. It was in the middle, right? The second Beit HaMikdash was destroyed in the year 70 Common Era. So this is more than 200 years before the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash. And essentially, we really have to start the story a little bit earlier than Chanukah, around 100 years earlier, with Alexander the Great. Alexander of Macedon conquered basically all of the known ancient world, including Eretz Yisrael, and that began a process of Hellenization. But the Hellenization of Alexander was not a coercive Hellenization. Basically, it was simply exposing all sorts of cultures and people to the culture of Greece, the philosophy, the literature, the athleticism, and the like. And this affected many societies throughout the world, particularly in Eretz Yisrael, in terms of architecture, in terms of art, in terms of literature, and the like, in terms of assimilation. If you take, for example, the Jewish community in Alexandria, which was a huge, wealthy, influential community, they were largely assimilated. Many were intermarried. In fact, if you read the Gemara doesn't really talk about it that much because both the Mishnah and the Gemara seem to look with a lot of disdain at the great degree of assimilation. But the Gemara discusses, for example, can a Sefer Torah be written in other languages? And according to one opinion, no. According to another opinion, the only other language that a Torah scroll can be written in is Greek, because of the blessing of Yavta Elokim LeYefes, that God gave beauty to Yefes, the progenitor of Yavan, V'yishkon b'olei Shem, and he may dwell in the tents of Shem. Now you wonder, who on earth would ever have a Sefer Torah in the Greek language? Like, why? In other words, if the Talmud discusses an issue, there must have been some relevance to that issue. And some historians have posited that the degree of religious illiteracy in Alexandria was so severe that although they had a magnificent synagogue, remember there's such a huge synagogue that when the Chazan was davening, people didn't hear, and there used to be a flag people would wave so you'd know when to answer Amen. Of course, in some synagogues...
the bells make the dress the same thing.
Okay, that's right. Well, that's pretty big. That's right. I was going to say, in some synagogues, because of the talking, you need someone to do that. But okay. Yeah. But in spite of the fact that this was a huge, ornate, magnificent synagogue, but some say the Sefer Torah was in Yavanit. It wasn't Greek.
Is that where it's all Greek to me comes from?
Might be so. Philo of Alexandria, who is way before the Chanukah story. Philo was the most learned Jew of Alexandria. He was actually an observant Jew to some degree. But some historians have posited, and he actually wrote commentaries. He wrote commentaries on the Torah. Some very fascinating commentaries on the Torah. But some say that his text was the Septuagint. His text was the Greek translation of the Torah. He did not read the Torah in the original. and Philo was the most frum that you had there. So, in a sense, in Eretz Yisrael, initially, that was the Mishnah, the Tanoim, very, very, keeping the halacha. But the Stukim, the Sadducees, were largely Hellenistic. And in Alexandria, the entire population was Hellenistic. So we start with Alexander the Great. And of course, the Gemara in Yuma gives us a very, very interesting story that at some point Alexander was told that the Jews were planning to rebel against him. So he went to Yerushalayim to destroy the Beit HaMikdash. And the Kohen Gadol at the time was the Kohen Gadol Shimon HaTzadik, who was the last surviving member of the Anshe Knesset Hagdolah, the men of the Great Assembly. And my yeshiva or semech is located on Rehov Shimon HaTzadik, and Shimon HaTzadik's kever is right across Kvish Achat. It is the kever of Shimon HaTzadik. People daven there. And it is said that when Alexander saw Shimon HaTzadik come out to plead to spare Yerushalayim or spare the Beit HaMikdash, so Alexander got off his horse. It's also a famous mythological horse, Alexander's horse also. There's some stories about that horse. Yeah. So Alexander bows down and he says, "You are the man I see in all of my dreams, promising me victory in the name of Hashem and warning me to have deference and respect for Yerushalayim and the Beis HaMikdash. And I dismiss those as just dreams until I see you in the flesh." And it is actually recorded as kind of a miraculous day of salvation when Alexander spared the Beis HaMikdash. And it is said in the Gemara Yuma that year every Jewish boy that was born that year was given the name Alexander, and that is how Alexander entered the Jewish lexicon of names. It is treated as a Shem Kodesh. A person can be called up to the Torah with the name Alexander. Yeah.
Rabbi, it's us that he read the book of Daniel, and it connected his...
Yes, very, very much so. If you look at the book of Daniel, you will see the war between the king of the north, the king of the south, which I'll get to in a moment. Yeah.
But wasn't it that he wanted a statue built, and he said, a statue's not a good thing, but each boy that's born will be named Alexander, which will go on from generation to generation. Now, like a statue might be destroyed. Right,
so that would be a better right. So Shimon HaTzadik negotiated him down. Okay. Yeah. And we know this. This was a recurring problem. There were Roman emperors later who wanted statue in the Beis HaMikdash as well. Now, Alexander died at a very young age, as you know, and legend has it that he died of a disease, of an epidemic, a plague. But legend has it that he died of a broken heart because he said, "I have no more worlds to conquer." That's a famous legend in the ancient world, as it were. But Alexander's huge empire. By the way, just to show you that with money you can get anybody. Alexander's father was Philip of Macedonia. He was a king, but a relatively small. How's it? Yes, a relatively small empire, or not empire, small country. But Philip hired for his son Aristotle as a private tutor. Now Aristotle was, outside of our Chachamim, was certainly the wisest man of the ancient world. We know that the Rambam, many centuries later, had tremendous admiration for Aristotle. The Rambam said Aristotle reached the greatest madrega of Chachma that a person could reach, short of Nevuah, short of prophecy. And Alexander had Aristotle all to himself. It's a very, very, very amazing thing that Aristotle took on private teaching jobs. I wasn't aware of that till I saw that. But be this as it may, when Alexander died, his empire was divided among different generals who were warring with each other, and different parts were taken over by some and then taken back by some, and there was a whole variety of civil wars. For our purposes, the two generals that you need to know about is Toynbee, that's the Ptolemy, who established the Ptolemaic dynasty, which primarily controlled Egypt, and Seleucus, that controlled Syria, Turkey, Asia Minor. And the Seleucid dynasty, the Ptolemaic dynasty, were in a constant state of war against each other. And as you can imagine, Eretz Yisrael, which is right in the middle between the two empires, right? Ptolemaic is Egypt, Seleucid is Syria, going back and forth. That's why people sometimes, I know that you're more sophisticated, but people sometimes have this image. We talk about Antiochus as being Greek, so people think somehow that some army from Athens went to wage war against Eretz Yisrael. That's not true. Antiochus is from Syria. He was a Seleucid of the Seleucid dynasty, and the whole story of Chanukah occurs at a time when Eretz Yisrael was under the control of the Seleucid dynasty in Syria, and we have this king Antiochus, who was known, he called himself Antiochus Epiphanes, Antiochus the Great. In fact, he was called by even his non-Jewish subjects Antiochus Epimanes, which sounds similar, but it's Antiochus the Crazy. And the truth of the matter is, in many, many ways, similar to Herod, much later, he probably was psychologically unbalanced in many, many ways. And Antiochus invented a new method of Hellenism. Hellenism was proceeding quite successfully in Eretz Yisrael, unfortunately, for religious Jews. Many, many Jews were assimilated. They were illiterate. They were not keeping the Torah. There was even some intermarriage, although not that much intermarriage per se. But Jews were adopting and flocking to Greek culture on a voluntary basis, much as people do in America or in any westernized country, even in Israel and the like. But Antiochus wanted to hurry up the process a little bit. And therefore Antiochus was really the first ruler of the ancient world to issue compulsory decrees against the practice of the Jewish religion. Now obviously we've had many enemies in the book of Kings, in the book of Judges, in Sefer Yoshua. We've had many, many wars. But all of those wars were over territory, were over land, were over control. The very, very first king who issued decrees against the practice of religion was in fact Antiochus. And Antiochus in many ways, and then from a modern perspective, you can look at him as almost in a perverted way, an enlightened monarch, because he was not anti-Semitic, he was not against Jews, he was not a Hitler, he was not a Haman. Antiochus was 100% willing to grant Jews full civil and political rights, provided citizenship, provided they just go with the plan. They don't be different, they don't stick out, they don't practice circumcision, they don't keep the Shabbos, don't keep kosher, just become like everybody else and this will be fine. Now many, many Jews went along with it, even before he issued those coercive decrees, but then we have the Maccabees, the Hashmonaim, etc. And they were a tiny little minority. Now, the story of Chanukah, the earliest version of the story of Chanukah we have, is in the apocryphal books that are called the books of the Maccabees, either Sefer HaMaccabim or Sefer Hashmonaim. What its exact title is not clear, and of course there are 4 books. There's Maccabees 1, Maccabees 2, Maccabees 3, Maccabees 4, but 3 and 4 are really not about Antiochus. They're really philosophical treatises that are not relevant on history. But the historical unfolding of the Chanukah campaign is in Maccabees 1 and Maccabees 2. Now, we still don't know what the original language of these books were. It has come down to us in Greek. Any Hebrew translation you see is a modern Hebrew translation. Some have suggested that originally it was written in Hebrew, and the Hebrew has gotten lost. Others have said the original language itself was Greek. That's still an open question. And that is why we have uncertainty what Maccabees mean. Right? I'm sure you've heard over the years, maybe even heard tonight, that what does Maccabee mean? Maccabi. So there are 2 pshatim that Meforshim give. One is that Maccabee is an abbreviation that was on their banner, Mem Chaf Beis Yud, and it represented the pasuk, Mi kamocha ba'elim Hashem, who is like you among the gods, Hashem, you are the most powerful. And that was their banner, in God we trust, so to speak. Now, if that's what Maccabee is, you would spell it with a chaf. The other translation of Maccabee, it comes from the word makevet, which is a biblical term meaning hammer, and it refers to the ferocity of the Maccabim as warriors. Now that would be spelled with a kuf. So you might simply ask the question, why are we debating if Maccabee means this or that? Let's just see how it's spelled in the book. The answer is we don't have the Hebrew book. We just have the Greek book. And as a result, therefore, we don't know what the original Hebrew spelling is, and hence we have a machlokes exactly what is the origin of the word Maccabee. But be it as it may, so Maccabee was simply kind of the nickname of the army. Hashmonaim were the family of the Kohanim who led the rebellion. Matisyahu had been the Kohen Gadol. He was very old. Then we have the 5 sons of Matisyahu. And the book of the Maccabees described the idea of these gezeros of Antiochus and the fact that the Hashmonaim organized a guerrilla army to fight against this powerful Greek army. But here is the thing. In the book of the Maccabees, this is what we read. On the 25th of Kislev, the Yevanim took over the Beis HaMikdash. Quite amazing. The day that they entered the Beis HaMikdash and took it out of our hands and contaminated it, and they built houses of prostitution, and they sacrificed pigs to idols. Right? This is what we mean that they were metame the Beis HaMikdash. That was on the 25th of Kislev, and on that very day, 3 years later, on the 25th of Kislev, the Hashmonaim regained the Beis HaMikdash and were able to purify it. So it's important to know that the book of the Maccabees makes the point that literally we re-entered the Beis HaMikdash on the very same day that it had been desecrated 3 years earlier. Now, in Maccabees 1, there is no mention at all of a cruse of oil, of a pach hashemen. If you read the book of Maccabees, and you ask the question, why did the Chachamim enact a holiday called Chanukah? The answer is given that they re-entered the Beis HaMikdash, they dedicated and consecrated the Beis HaMikdash, and the Chanukat Habayit is supposed to be 8 days, just as it was in the time of Moshe Rabbeinu. Now again, in the time of Moshe Rabbeinu, when the Mishkan was built in the Midbar, so you'll see there were 7 preliminary days of consecration. That's from the 23rd of Adar till the end of Adar. And then Rosh Chodesh Nisan was the actual final day. So Chanukas HaMishkan was 8 days. Chanukas Bayit Sheni, the Beit Chanukah, was 8 days. Now, so according to this itself is historically a very, very simple answer to the Beis Yosef's famous question. Like the Beis Yosef asks a famous question, one of the most famous questions, and that is, if you assume that the miracle of Chanukah is because the oil was supposed to burn 1 day and it burned 8 days, then the miracle of Chanukah should only be 7 days and not 8 days. Why do we make Chanukah for 8 days? Right? That's the question. What's the miracle? And there are at least 500 answers to this. And this I know for sure because I saw a sefer that has 500 answers to this question. I don't know more than a fraction of them, but according to the book of the Maccabees, the question is the answer is a very simple answer. The 8 days is not because of the miracle of the Pach HaShemen. It is because of the Chanukat Habayit. And in fact, that's what Chanukah means. I know we have a drasha, Chanukah is Chanu Chavhei. They rested on the 25th. But Pashat Pshat is Pashat Pshat. Chanukah is dedication of the Beis HaMikdash. And it was an 8-day dedication ceremony. Now, the only question you might ask, but I'll give you a good answer for this, is, well, wait a second. The Chanukah Habayit of Moshe Rabbeinu was 8 days. Yes. But the Chanukah Habayit of Shlomo HaMelech, when he built the first Beis HaMikdash, was not 8 days, it was 14 days. And if you remember, one of those days was Yom Kippur. Actually, it's an amazing thing. The day that they dedicated the Beis HaMikdash, they ate, or the year that they dedicated the first Mikdash, they ate on Yom Kippur. They celebrated 14 days. It ended Shmini Atzeres. There were 7 days before Sukkot, and then the 7 days of Sukkot, culminating with Shmini Atzeres. It says that they were given permission to eat on Yom Kippur. So the question, though, is, why did the Maccabees follow the Chanukah's Hamishkan of Moshe rather than the Chanukah's Habayas of Shlomo. But there's actually a very beautiful medrash that gives us an answer to this question, because it actually says that Moshe Rabbeinu with Bezalel had finished the Mishkan in Kislev, but Hashem wanted to delay the dedication of the Mishkan until the month of Yetzias Mitzrayim, which was Nisan. So Hashem had to placate the month of Kislev by telling Kislev, listen, you should have been the month of the dedication of the Mishkan. Since you're not, I promise you there'll be a further dedication in the time of the Chashmonaim. So now it's a perfect symmetry, because it turns out that Kislev was entitled to the 8 days of Moshe's dedication, and that's the 8 days that the Maccabees gave it. By the way, a very similar thing happened with Shlomo HaMelech. It actually says Shlomo HaMelech finished the Beis HaMikdash in Cheshvan 11 months earlier, and Hashem wanted to delay it until Tishrei. So Cheshvan was promised, this is actually a medrash, that it will be the month of the dedication of the third Beis HaMikdash, which is quite amazing. Cheshvan we look at as the month without Chagim. Mar Cheshvan. Cheshvan, according to some midrashim, is the month of the dedication of the third Mikdash, making up for Shlomo. So appearances are deceiving. So, when you walk away from Maccabees 1, the holiday of Chanukah is a celebration of the rededication of the Mikdash after it was contaminated. Okay, now, Maccabees 2 gives you a different perspective. Maccabees 2, now Maccabees 1, by the way, is a very, very detailed, probably more detailed than most people are interested in, of like every single war. It's really, I believe in some military academies it's actually studied as a study, a classic study of ancient methods of guerrilla warfare, because the Maccabees were among the earliest of guerrilla warfare against a huge, powerful, organized, but somewhat static, non-fluid type of army, and he goes through every single war. And what's interesting is Maccabees 1 emphasizes very much the military prowess and skill. Now again, it is still portrayed as a religious conflict. That's very important. Maccabees 1 does not portray the war against Antiochus as a secular war. This was a war to be able to establish Torah and Avodah and mitzvahs. But when it emphasizes the heroism of the Jewish people, it talks about their military prowess. Maccabees 2 goes over a lot of the same history, but it's interesting that it emphasizes a different type of point. It emphasizes the righteousness of martyrdom, the fact that so many Jews were killed by Antiochus, that they died al Kiddush Hashem. So, for example, the famous story of Hannah and her 7 children, all of whom died rather than submit to idolatry, that appears in Maccabees 2. So it's so interesting. Both accounts are true. There was military heroism, and there was spiritual Mesiras Nefesh al Kiddush Hashem. But each author emphasized a different theme, and it's so fascinating, because in many, many ways, this is still a debate that's going on in modern Israeli society. If you think, for example, about Yom HaShoah, like the observance of Yom HaShoah, both in Israel and actually in most places in the United States, is in it's in the month of Nisan, after, right? And the date that was chosen was the fall of the Warsaw Ghetto, and there was a particular reason why this was chosen. Again, not for halakhic reasons. Halakhic reasons are very problematical. In the month of Nisan, it's interesting that the celebrated days in Israel are kind of difficult on both perspectives. Yom Ha'atzmaut, the day of rejoicing, is in the middle of the counting of the Omer, right? So that raises a problem that this is a time you're not supposed to rejoice, you have to be in Avelos. Yom HaShoah is in Nisan, when you're not allowed to be sad. So we kind of don't get it right either way. But if you go back to the 1940s, right after World War II, there was a very, very big debate. What day, what event, what ma'orah should commemorate the Holocaust? And the reason why the fall of the Warsaw Ghetto was chosen is because the Warsaw Ghetto was one of the very few situations where the Jews had a military uprising against the enemies. And the truth of the matter is, in the early years of the State of Israel, again, it's painful to say, many people were ashamed at the Jews who went to their deaths as sheep to the slaughter, was the common expression. That was not the Jew we wanted to be machshev. That was not the Jew we could respect. We can only respect the Jew that is a fighter, that is tough, that is strong, that doesn't get pushed around. And hence the Warsaw Ghetto was the event that was chosen to memorialize. Now, it is very, very true that the ones who died in the Warsaw Ghetto were Kedoshim as well, and they deserve to be commemorated. But at the same time, we have to recognize that Kiddush Hashem can take many, many different forms. There is the Kiddush Hashem of destroying your enemies in order to build up a Jewish society. And then there's the Kiddush Hashem when it's Ein Bereicha. You go to your death with nobility and self-sacrifice. And that too is a Kiddush Hashem. So what's interesting is the very debate that played out in Israeli society in the 1940s between those who wanted to commemorate the Warsaw Ghetto versus those who wanted to commemorate the, what you might call the passive resistance of giving your life for Hashem, is exactly the division in emphasis between Maccabees 1 that emphasizes military heroism versus Maccabees 2. But, so that's one Nekuda of Hevdel. But there's a second Nekuda of Hevdel. Maccabees 2 also does not mention the miracle of the Pach Hashem. I'll tell you where that comes in. But Maccabees 2 gives another reason for 8 days. And this is very peculiar. It says, the Chachamim enacted there be an 8-day commemoration of this great victory because that year they were not able to bring the Korbanot of Sukkot. They could not commemorate the big holiday of Sukkot. And Sukkot is really an 8-day holiday because you have 7 days of Sukkot and Shmini Atzeres, which is a separate Chag. So Chanukah was enacted as a tashlumin, as a makeup for a holiday of Sukkot. Ad kidei kach, that it says in Maccabees 2 that many of the people would take the lulav and the esrog and build sukkos on Chanukah Day. Now, this too is an answer to the Beis Yosef's question. Why is Chanukah 8 days? Not because of the miracle of the oil, but because of the connection to Sukkot. Now, the second suggestion, our Chachamim in the Mishnah and the Gemara seem to simply treat with contempt, in the sense that it's not even mentioned. There's a phrase in German, I think it's called Totenschweig, that means kill by silence, meaning to say the Chachamim consider whatever Maccabees 2 said about Sukkot as a totally illegitimate tradition, simply because halachically it makes no sense. You can't make up for Sukkot. If you miss Sukkot, you don't build a sukkah during Hanukkah. There was only one holiday where the Torah gives you a partial makeup, and that is, of course, Pesach Sheni, but that's it. So the Chachamim considered this, the statement in Maccabees 2, to be maybe the folk tradition of Amei Ha'aretz, and does not become part of the halachic structure. However, what is fascinating is, I think if you know your history here, this could shed light on a Talmudic passage, because there is one passage in the Talmud that indicates that even hundreds of years later, there was a residual, vestigial memory connecting Chanukah to Sukkot. And this is the famous machlokas Beis Hillel and Beit Shammai. Right, machlokas Beis Hillel and Beit Shammai, how do you light the Chanukah candles? Beis Shammai says start off with 8 on day 1 and you go down. Beis Hillel says start with 1 and go up. We of course follow Beis Hillel, and Beis Shammai is a little hard to understand. Beis Hillel's view is Malin Bakodesh, in holiness we increase. So the Gemara says in Beis Shammai, well, Beis Shammai says the pattern of Chanukah should follow the pattern of the offerings of the Sukkot festival, the bowls that were brought during Sukkot, in which day 1 was 13, day 2 was 12. And all the commentaries have a lot of problem. What on earth is the connection? Okay, so the bulls of Sukkot go down. Chanukah follows the Sukkot? So I would suggest to you that Beis Shammai is preserving the ancient tradition of Maccabees 1 that connected the 8 days of Chanukah to the Sukkot festival. So in many, many ways, what you see is an interesting phenomenon. That even
Maccabees 2?
Maccabees 2, yeah, that even when the Chachamim wanted to discard a minhag, they felt the minhag was not proper, there might be various ways in which it still pops up in different ways. But Bekitzer, therefore, both according to Maccabees 1 and Maccabees 2, the 8 days of Chanukah were not enacted for the Pach HaShemen. Maccabees 1 said it was enacted to celebrate the dedication of the Beis HaMikdash, which was a Chanukah of 8 days, like Moshe Rabbeinu's Chanukah HaMishkan. Maccabees 2 connects it to the holiday of Sukkot. Now, the first mention of the Pach HaShemen is not in the book of the Maccabees at all. The first mention of the Pach HaShemen is in a sefer called Megillas Ta'anit. Megillas Tanis. Now, this is a bit of a confusing name. Megillas Tanis literally means the scroll of fasting, but actually it's the opposite. It is a listing of the days that you're not allowed to fast because they are festive. The days that you don't give eulogies and you don't fast. And this was the earliest written document of the Torah Shebaal Peh. This is earlier than the Mishnah. The Mishnah was completed around the year 200 of the Common Era. Megillat Tanit was completed probably 100 years earlier. So that would get you 100 of the Common Era. But still, that is more than 200 years after the Chanukah story, which is around 185 BCE. So it's important to understand Megillat Tanit is 200 years after the Chanukah story. And Megillat Tanit describes for the first time the idea that Megillat Tanit, I said I would tape this for somebody and I'm sorry. So in Megillat Tanit it actually reads that they found the Pach HaShemen. It only was able to burn for 1 day and it burned for 8 days, and they made Chanukah because of the Pach HaShemen. Now, and that story from Megillas Tanis is incorporated in the Babylonian Talmud. Now, there are people of a secular orientation, of which I am not, I hope, who basically say, oh, that proves the Pach HaShemen is a made-up Bava Maisa. As Ma'aminim, we say Chas v'Shalom. Of course that miracle occurred. But here is the point. The fact that a great miracle occurred with the oil is not a reason to make a Yom Tov. We make Yomim Tovim for events like our survival, for the events of having the Beis HaMikdash. Just because God does a great isolated miracle is not the reason for the Chag. Moreover, most people weren't aware of that. Keep in mind, in some ways, the miracle of Chanukah is not totally unique. In the Beis HaMikdash, there always, well, not always, but when the Jewish people were on a spiritually high level, there was always a Ner Tamid that didn't go out, or they would put it out and be able to light it without necessarily filling it up. So Chanukah was all of the candles, all of the 7 candles. So why did Megillat Tanit change? So essentially that's what I mean by Chanukah version 1 and Chanukah version 2. Chanukah version 1 essentially celebrated our triumph over the Yevanim. Chanukah version 2 celebrates the miracle of the Pach HaShemen. Why was there that change? So there are a few reasons to be said here. First of all, reason number 1 is that celebrating a military victory over a foreign occupying power was not a politically correct type of holiday to do when you're under Roman domination. The Romans see Jews lighting a menorah. The Romans say, oh, why are you lighting a menorah? Oh, because we defeated this oppressive Greek occupying power that was keeping us from keeping the Torah, and we like to publicly celebrate that every single year. Not too politically correct. So as a result, the emphasis of Chanukah, again, it's not a question of changing the story, but the emphasis changed from the military victory against the Yavan to the spiritual godless of the miracle of the Pach HaShemen. That's one thing. Reason number 2, Ramban points out that in a way the Hasmonean revolution actually turned out to be a failure. Because who were the Chashmonaim? They were tzaddikim. They were very, very righteous. But they made one critical mistake. They proclaimed themselves king upon the conclusion of the war, and that was not right, the Ramban says, because Malchus belongs to the tribe of Yehuda. And because of it, the Chashmonaim wound up eventually being wiped out. Second point, those of you who have read George Orwell's Animal Farm, so you may recall that this is his parody of the Russian Revolution, in which the animals rebel against the oppressive owners. But the animals become, or at least some of the animals become, as despotic and dictatorial as the owners they were trying to replace. Right? And Orwell was making the point that Lenin and then Stalin didn't really create a greater equality of society, unless everyone's equally miserable, but didn't really create a better society. Robespierre versus Louis XVI. Phnom Penh versus whoever was the king of Cambodia. These were not revolutions that improved people's lives. And the revolutionary often becomes equal to or worse than the despot. Castro, that's correct. Castro and Batista, that's correct. So, tragically, this was the eventual fate of the Hasmoneans themselves, because they were fighting Hellenism. They were fighting to establish the primacy of Torah, Avodas Hashem, Ruchnius. What eventually happened in the course of time, by the time the Mishnah was written, by the time of Megillat Tanit, the Hasmoneans themselves became the very enemy they were fighting against. They became the Hellenists. They became the persecutors of the Chachamim. Many of the great Chachamim had to go in hiding. So by the time Megillat Tanit is written, what are we going to celebrate? We're going to celebrate the victory of the Hasmoneans? First of all, politically that victory is no longer here because the Romans came in. Spiritually the victory is not here because the Chashmonaim themselves became Hellenists. So as a result, the Chachamim were very ambivalent about Chanukah. What exactly is it that we celebrate? The answer is, we still celebrate God's love for us, God's providence for us. So even if the political situation is no longer a cause for great, great celebration. That is why I say there's a Chanukah version 1 that emphasizes Milchama, and the Chanukah version 2 that emphasizes Pach Shemen. Now, the Al HaNisim prayer, this is a very famous question. The Al HaNisim prayer that we recite in Shmona Esrei and in Birchas HaMazon does not mention the miracle of the oil at all. It only mentions the miracle of the Milchama and the fact that the many were delivered in the hands of the few and the impure in the hands of the pure. Right, and even though it mentions we lit candles in your courtyard, that's not referring to any miracle. It just says we lit the menorah. It does not indicate there was any miracle in that connection. The answer is this: the Al HaNisim is a very, very old prayer. The Al HaNisim dates literally from the time of the miracle itself. And as I'm explaining, the original emphasis of the miracle was the Milchama, and it was not the Pach HaShemen. Now the emes is, this point, the Maharal did not see the book of the Maccabees, but the emes is the Maharal himself, in his great wisdom, was mechavein to this. The Maharal writes, it's a davar pashut to him, that the holiday of Chanukah was not created because of the miracle of the Pach HaShemen. The holiday of Chanukah was created because of the victory against Yavan and the dedication of the Beis HaMikdash. But the miracle of the Pach HaShemen was necessary, the Maharal says, so we shouldn't attribute the victory to our own kochi v'yotzem yadi. So we needed the miracle, but the miracle was not intrinsically important. It was needed to make us realize that the victory comes from Hashem, and Chanukah is 8 days, the Maharal says, because Chanukah is a bias, not because of the miracle of the oil itself. Right? So the Maharal himself says exactly this point, even without looking at the book of the Maccabees. Now, there's another interesting historical point that's, I think, a very, very moving point. And that is, we tend to think that the rededication of the Mikdash and the finding of the oil occurred at the end of this military struggle against Yavin. Meaning we got the Yavin out of the country, we established the Hasmonean dynasty, and we found the oil. In point of fact, that is not the case. The war against Antiochus continued to extend many, many years. It was a 25-year struggle. The Chanukah story is 3 years into that struggle. Now, gaining the Beis HaMikdash is a very, very important part of the victory, but Eretz Yisrael was still under Antiochus' control. So it's important to understand the following. The miracle of the oil is not the end of the military struggle. It is towards the beginning of the struggle with almost 2 decades left, more than 2 decades left. Now that has a very important implication, because instead of looking at it as a prize or a frosting on the cake, it is actually a message to a struggling army not to lose hope. Because again, let's imagine you're a Maccabee or you're a Hasmonean in those early stages. You are fighting against the most powerful army in the world. You are small, you are beleaguered. Not only are you fighting against the Yevanim, but your own co-religionists, your own fellow Jews, think you're crazy. They think you're fanatic. They do not support what you're doing. And the normal response of a person is to give up hope, to think that there's no use going on. Why should I keep on fighting day after day? What am I able to accomplish? So what is Hashem showing with this miracle of the oil? Here too, there's only enough oil for 1 day. There's no way it's going to burn for 8 days. And a person might have the attitude, why should I bother to light the candle at all if it's going to go out tomorrow? Like, what's the use? I'll just wait 8 days. But what is the lesson of Chanukah? What is Hashem telling you? That you light the light that you have, no matter how ineffectual it is. And then God takes over. Now think about that as a message to this army, not at the end of their struggle. They don't need that message at the end. They've accomplished it. But at the beginning of the struggle, the message is, don't give up. Don't despair. Have courage. Have faith in Hashem. Have faith in yourselves. That know that if you're able to shed light in any good way, even if it looks like your efforts are ineffectual or worthless, Hashem will bless your efforts. So the Pach Hashemin is very important because that gave encouragement. That gave chizuk. I think I may have mentioned last week that really, we live in a world that is filled with darkness. The darkness of assimilation, the darkness of ignorance, the darkness of violence and hate, the personal darkness that a person has, whether it's illness or depression. And often a person looks at their situation, looks at the world situation, and says it's hopeless, there's nothing that we can do. But the message of Chanukah is, we light the little light that we have. And then God takes over. If they wouldn't have lit the candle for the first day, there wouldn't have been a miracle. The candle is not going to light by itself. You do what you can, and then good things happen, even if it doesn't seem to be connected. That's a wonderful, wonderful message of hope, not only for the political situation, but really for all of the forms of darkness that surround us in many, many, many ways. And that's why I think it's very meaningful that the Maccabees got this message towards the beginning of their struggle, not at the end. At the end, they wouldn't need it. They achieved victory, they achieved victory. But this is telling them, don't give up, as hopeless as your situation is. And that's really the magnificent message of Chanukah, the Hiskabrut Ha'or al HaChoshech. Now, I'll give you another answer to the famous Beis Yosef's kasha. Why is Chanukah 8 days? Again, as I say, there are 500 answers. But one interesting answer is, what's the kasha? The miracle is only that it burns for 7 days. What's the miracle of day 1? So some want to say the miracle of day one is to understand that even the natural order of things is also a miracle. You know, we say in davening, in Modim, Al Nisecha Shebechol Yom Imanu. We thank Hashem for the miracles that He does every single day. The fact that we can walk, that we can talk, that we can move, that we can love, that we can think, that we are in Eretz Yisrael, and with the Medinat Yisrael, after all of these thousands of years, being in exile, even though we're still, far from Mashiach, not that the temple, the Mikdash is not here yet, but nevertheless, these are such miracles. The fact that Jews are still around. Everyone knows Mark Twain's famous article, and Rav Yaakov Emden said that the miracle of Jews being around is a greater miracle than Kriyas Yamsuf and the 10 Makkos. We make no sense. It's not sensible. Arnold Toynbee, who was a famous British historian, a big anti-Semite.
Yes.
Basically, once said that he didn't understand why there are Jews in the world, and he termed us a fossilized people. We are a fossil. We are a fly trapped in amber. And he was attacked for that, and Yaakov Hertzog debated him on a lot of college campuses. The Hertzog-Toynbee debate was a famous debate. Just to show you, Yeridat HaDorot, we say the Doros go, in the 1950s and 60s, there was the Hertzog-Toynbee debate. A very high level discussion. Now, they have the Latkes Hamantashen debate. If you go to I don't know if they have it here or not, but in American campuses, even graduate schools, people have a debate. What is better, a latke or a hamantashen? Right. So that's Yeridas Hadoros. It's not the Hertzog Toynbee debate anymore. But be it as it may, my argument is that Toynbee is actually right. And Toynbee is fulminating or foaming at the mouth and saying there ought not to be Jews in the world. From the perspective of historical causality and the rise and fall of civilizations based on the natural order, he is correct. He is a historian. He studied 50 civilizations. He wrote the study of history. He determined the factors that contribute to their rise and their fall. And he did the Romans, the Babylonians, and the Sumerians, and up to the Greeks and the Romans. And he mapped and he charted. And based on that, there ought not to be a Jewish people. He's right. We exist by virtue of the miracle, the supernatural. The Maharal writes, that is why the Brit Milah, circumcision, which is the sign of our relationship to Hashem, is on the 8th day, because 7 is the cycle of nature, 6 days of creation with the Shabbos. 8 is above nature. Right? So that's what Chanukah is. You generate your light, and then God takes it to a supernatural level if you do the best that you can. But, going back to the Beis Yosef's question, therefore, many, many things that don't look like miracles are in fact miracles. So Hashem basically says, I want you to realize it's not just the 7 extra days that's the miracle, but the ordinary burning of fire, of oil, is also a nace. And the Chassam Sofer says, he gives a beautiful support to this answer from Ma'os Sur. Ma'os Sur is the song everybody sings after they light the candles. So, as you know, Ma'os Sur is based on the whole history of exile, starting in Mitzrayim, and then Babylonia, then Persia, then Greece, or Yavan, and then culminating in the last stanza of Ma'os Sur, which was heavily censored. And that's the Golus Edom. That is why if people are singing from different Sidurim, they may have different words in that last stanza because it was very much affected in different ways. But be it as it may, in the stanza about the Chanukah, so there's only one stanza in Chanukah, the Chanukah stanza, Yevanim nikmatsu alai, the Yevanim came against me. So it says, B'nei Binah, the children of understanding, Yemei Shemona, for 8 days, Kavu Shir Urinanim, they made songs and rejoicing. So what is the phrase b'nei bina? That's an unusual phrase. The children of Bina. Now you could simply say, well, listen, the author had to have a rhyme. B'nei bina yemei shmona, right? Things have to rhyme, right? So you have to make up something that rhymes. But the Chassam Sofer says there's a deeper meaning. What is the difference between chachma and bina? Chacham is a person who absorbs information. He looks at things and he absorbs it. Bina is mevin davar mitoch davar. He draws new conclusions from pre-existing facts. So here's what the Chassam Sofer says. A chacham would have made Chanukah 7 days, because oil was found for 1 day, and there was a supernatural miracle. It burned for 7 days. But a bina, b'nei bina, a person with bina, that's mevin davar mitoch davar, understands from the burning of the miracle, we understand that even the normal operation of oil is miraculous. It comes from Hashem. And in fact, the Ramban writes in Chumash that the word for miracle, nes literally means a banner or a flag. Now, we even use in English, a red flag is to call your attention to something, meaning we take nature for granted. We forget about Hashem. We think things just operate, they operate the way they operate. Every once in a while, Hashem has to put a flag in front of our eyes. Hey, I'm here, notice me. But it's not the miracle that is Hashem's intervention. Hashem's intervention is in everything. But we take it for granted. So Hashem does the nes every once in a while. And therefore the B'nai Bina make Chanukah 8 days, even though a Chacham would have made Chanukah only for 7 days. Okay, so this is just some thoughts about the Chag, and I wish you all a Chag, Chanukah, Chag Horim Sameach, and may all of us have the capacity to bring light into the world, and to understand that even if we feel that our light is small and ineffectual and meaningless, whenever we do what we can, HaKadosh Baruch Hu will bless our efforts beyond what we thought was possible in any way. Okay, be well.